Let's go Dolphins! Something strange is happening behind the scenes, and I have to tell you right now, because what looked like a simple contract extension may actually be hiding something much bigger. At first, everyone saw the headlines, saw the money, and thought the story ended there. But after more details started coming out, some fans began asking a completely different question. Did Miami simply reward one of its biggest stars? Or did they quietly set up a much larger plan that almost nobody noticed at first? Because the more information that surfaces, the more this starts feeling like a move with layers hidden underneath it. And trust me, one particular detail has people talking, because if what many are starting to believe turns out to be true, this could change the way fans look at this entire situation moving forward. Before I tell you everything, make sure you've already hit that like button if you truly believe great things are coming for the Miami Dolphins. And I want to see the optimistic fans show up in the comments right now. Comment this, "Go Dolphins! The best is still coming." Now let's get right into it. The headline over the last couple of weeks has been the contract extension involving Devon Achane, and at first glance many fans looked at the numbers and immediately thought one thing. Miami rewarded one of its biggest weapons and secured him for years to come. And that part is true. But once the details started coming out, the conversation became much more interesting because when you start looking beneath the surface, the structure of this deal starts telling a very different story. The extension runs 4 years and keeps Achane with Miami through the 2030 season. The average sits around $16 million annually and can rise even higher depending on bonuses and incentives. There was a signing bonus attached, along with guaranteed money at signing, but the really fascinating part isn't the headline number itself. It's how the entire contract was designed. Because if you only read the major number attached to the contract, you might assume Miami handed over complete control financially. But that isn't what happened here. The details begin to reveal flexibility. Certain portions of future money only become guaranteed later. Some of those guarantees activate in future years depending on timing and roster situations. And that creates room for Miami if unexpected situations appear over the next couple of seasons. Think about that for a moment. Fans often celebrate huge contracts immediately because they see a player staying with the organization. But front offices think differently. They think about risk. They think about cap management. They think about protecting themselves years down the road. And this is where things become really interesting. Looking ahead at future cap percentages, the numbers stay below 5% throughout the extension years. That means Miami potentially keeps one of its biggest offensive weapons without placing overwhelming pressure on future spending flexibility. That's why some people are calling this a steal. Not because Devon Achane isn't valuable. Actually, the opposite. The argument being made is that Miami managed to secure someone viewed as one of the league's best running backs while keeping financial flexibility intact. But then another conversation starts. And this may be where things get controversial among Dolphins fans. Because one of the topics discussed around this extension wasn't purely production. It was risk. The discussion centered around physical profile and workload concerns connected with being the lead back over a long period of time. The point being raised was not that injuries will happen. Nobody said that. But there was discussion about minimizing financial exposure if circumstances ever changed. And that's where some fans may disagree. Some people will say Miami should simply reward elite talent and stop worrying about future scenarios. Others may say the smartest organizations prepare for every possibility. And while this contract discussion was happening, another layer started appearing in the conversation. Because suddenly attention shifted toward the running back room itself. There was discussion around Ollie Gordon and Jaylen receiving opportunities, and especially around how different player styles could potentially complement each other. The contrast being mentioned was size and physicality versus explosiveness and elusiveness. Now suddenly the conversation isn't only about one contract anymore. Now people are asking a bigger question. Was this extension only about rewarding a player? Or was it part of a larger blueprint for how Miami wants to build its offense moving forward? And that's where things start getting even more interesting because the discussion moved away from pure contract numbers and started pointing toward what the running back room could potentially look like moving forward. Suddenly, people weren't just talking about dollars, guarantees, and cap percentages anymore. They started talking about usage, workload distribution, and how Miami could maximize what they already have. Because if we're following only the information that surfaced from this discussion, there appears to be an expectation of another big year for Devon Achane. There was even mention of the possibility of taking another step after his previous production and becoming even more central to the offense. But here's where the conversation took a turn. Even with Achane expected to remain the primary player, there was also attention placed on the idea that backup opportunities could increase. That is where names like Jaylen and Ollie Gordon entered the discussion. Now stop and think about this for a second, because many fans immediately hear the words contract extension and automatically assume one thing: this player is getting all the work. But that wasn't really the direction of the conversation. Instead, there was discussion about balance. There was discussion about creating combinations that complement each other. And when Ollie Gordon started being talked about, the focus became his physical profile compared to Achane's profile. The discussion highlighted a major difference in size and build, bringing up the idea that different styles could potentially work together rather than compete against each other. That's where an interesting possibility emerged. Imagine situations where defenses spend an entire game dealing with one style of runner and then suddenly have to adjust to something completely different. That possibility was part of the discussion, not as a prediction, not as confirmation, just as a possibility being considered. And then another quote kept resurfacing throughout this entire conversation. Fast gets slow, but big doesn't get small. That line generated a lot of attention because people immediately started trying to interpret what it could mean. Some heard it and started wondering whether it reflected a larger philosophy. Others started wondering if it simply highlighted the value of adding physicality into the overall mix. Because if you really think about it, this entire conversation keeps circling back to one thing: balance. The contract itself appears structured around balancing reward and flexibility. The running back room discussion appears to revolve around balancing different strengths and traits. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. Because at the beginning everybody saw headlines. Then they saw money. Then they saw years and guarantees. But after digging deeper, the discussion became much larger than a simple extension. Now it becomes a question about how pieces fit together. Now it becomes a conversation about whether Miami quietly built flexibility into both the financial side and the football side at the same time. And if that's what happened here, some fans may look back on this entire situation months from now and say the real story was never the contract itself. The real story was everything happening around it. As this conversation kept unfolding, another important detail started standing out because there was a clear point being repeated over and over. This wasn't being presented as a situation where Miami simply paid for what already happened. The discussion was leaning toward what could happen next. That's a major difference. Paying someone because of past production and investing because of future expectations are two completely different things. And the reason this became part of the discussion is because of what was said regarding Devon Achane's trajectory moving forward. There was strong belief that his role could continue growing and that his production could remain at an extremely high level. But at the same time, there was another point raised that cannot be ignored: workload. Because while there was confidence surrounding Achane's impact, there was also conversation around avoiding the idea of making one player carry absolutely everything by himself. And honestly, that's where things become fascinating. Because if the idea is to maximize efficiency while protecting long-term value, then suddenly the surrounding pieces become extremely important. Jaylen Wright was brought up as someone who previously showed efficiency with opportunities received. Ollie Gordon was discussed for different reasons entirely, with attention being placed on physical traits and potential complementary value. And now look at what starts happening. You begin with one player getting an extension. Then the discussion expands into future roster flexibility. Then it moves toward role distribution. Then suddenly you're talking about the entire running back room instead of one individual. That